I'd like to welcome you to this really special evening that we're having tonight. My name is Paul Burke. I'm a professor at the Crawford School of Public Policy. I'm Deputy Director and this week Acting Director of the school. I'd like to pass on the apologies of the Director of the school, Professor Janine O'Flynn, who would love to be here. He was away this week, back on Monday, but did pass on all this for the lecture. And looking forward to the discussion. She would have enjoyed that too. Please come in. There are a couple of seats right at the front.
Thank you.
I would like to start tonight by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're meeting, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and pay respects to their elders, past and present. The Crawford School of Public Policy tonight proudly presents the first lecture in the 2025 Professorial Lecture Series. And Ben, you've become professor now. I'm going to go into your bio. This is what happens when you become professor. You'll get a big round of applause on it as well. This is our first in the series to celebrate newly appointed professors in the school. The initiative highlights and honours the distinguished academics that reach that level. The series reflects the school's ongoing commitment to recognising exceptional academic contributions. This lecture tonight is coordinated with the Australian Centre on China in the World, and it's great to be meeting here in their beautiful building, and is part of the ANU China Seminar Series, a leading forum for high-level discussions on China and the Sinophone world. Tonight's topic is Shouldering the Burden Village China, and it looks a really fascinating lecture that we're going to be hearing. In this lecture, Professor Ben Hillman will examine the Communist Party of China's strategy for taking direct control of the countryside and discuss its consequences. I would like to mention we are recording the lecture, so we'll be recording while Professor Hillman is presenting, and let's save Q&A up for after that. We will then turn off the recording and then we'll have an open question and answer session. To Ben, Professor Ben Hillman is a political scientist, public policy researcher and advisor. He is director of the Australian Centre on China in the World here at ANU, one of the leading institutions focused on Chinese studies and helping Australians to better understand China. He is editor of the China Journal, the world's leading scholarly journal on China, and chair of the International Consortium on Contemporary China Studies. Yeah, you sound extremely busy. Ben's research examines policies and mechanisms for promoting political inclusion and safeguarding minority rights, and also politics, public policy, and public administration in China. Professor Hillman convenes the China In-Country Study Program, Chinese Language and Rural China Study Tour, which provides ANU students with an immersive experience in China, allowing them to learn firsthand about development challenges in the countryside. And Ben, I understand you're off next month for the next trip with students. Professor Hillman has provided advisory and consultancy work for governments and international organisations on areas such as capacity development, post-conflict reconstruction, strategic planning, and political inclusion. His recent books are Political and Social Control in China, The Consolidation of Single-Party Rule with Qian Wen-ku, ANU Press 2024, China's New Era with Annie Ren, and the Communist Party of China, Understanding the Durability of the World's Most Powerful Political Organisation. From 2018 to 2021, he served as director of the Policy and Governance Program, teaching program at the Crawford School of Public Policy. Professor Ben Hillman is just promoted to professor. It started as of 1 January this year. And I would like to now hand the floor over, but can we first congratulate Ben on his professorial?
Thanks, Paul, for that very generous introduction. And welcome everyone to the Australian Centre on China and the World, especially if you're joining us for the first time. It's wonderful to see such a diverse audience, ANU colleagues, Crawford colleagues, CIW, friends from across the ANU community, but also Canberra high schools, members of the public. It's great to see you here. I also recognise some of my students in the room from previous China in-country courses, so really glad you could all be here tonight. For those of you who are visiting CIW for the first time, I'd like to just say a couple of words about our centre. I think the work that we are doing here is really important. It's really important for building China literacy, China capability more broadly in Australia. China is such an important country in our region, our largest trading partner by far, 30% of total trade. And it's really important for young people, whether they're going to work in government in the future or in private industry, that we have a broader base understanding of China and the Chinese world. And so CIW is working on that mission very hard through the in-country study programs that we lead with funding from DFAT's New Colombo Plan. We run an extensive portfolio of executive education focused on the federal government, which is really important work too. And I'm pleased to announce that we've just secured a $1 million grant from the National Foundation for Australia-China Relations to send 50 Australian graduates to China for a year of advanced study over the next 4 years. So that's just a snapshot of some of the work we're doing, and there's literature outside if you'd like to learn more. But let me get into the lecture tonight, which is a story about, an important story about change in rural China. It's based on quite recent field research that I've undertaken in China, but I've also, for the lecture tonight, I'm contextualizing it in a bigger and I think a more important story that I think will resonate with all of you here. Under China's leader, Xi Jinping, the Communist Party of China has laid out its vision for China's development. The China Dream, as it's sometimes referred to, or the Great Rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, which seeks to restore China's economic, diplomatic and military strength by 2049. Rural development has featured prominently in China's grand vision. Yet it's been overshadowed, particularly in international public and scholarly debate, by developments in China's urban industrial sector. EVs, automation, green energy, AI. These are the developments in China that we most commonly read about. The China Dream, the China Dream or the Great Rejuvenation vision for China is anchored in two centennial goals. And I think people here are largely familiar with those. Both of these goals, importantly, have significant rural components, which again are often overlooked. The first centennial goal was that China, and these centennial goals were announced when Xi Jinping came to power in 2012. The first was that China would achieve moderate prosperity by 2021, which is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Communist Party of China. And this was broadly at the time understood to mean a doubling of per capita income over the next 10 years, so by 2021, which was by and large achieved. But the first centennial goal also became synonymous with Xi Jinping's signature poverty alleviation campaign, which sought to lift 70 million Chinese citizens above the abject poverty threshold, which officially is 4,000 RMB per annum. Not a lot of money, 4,000 RMB, that's less than 1,000 Australian dollars per annum. And so the incredibly ambitious program that needed to lift 1 million people per month above that threshold in order to achieve the goal. It was a massive nationwide campaign that mobilised hundreds of thousands of officials and investments of hundreds of billions of dollars in the countryside. It worked. In February 2021, Xi Jinping declared that poverty, by the official measure of 4,000 yuan per annum, was abolished. No one in China was abjectly poor anymore, and thus the first centennial goal had been achieved. And if people are interested in some of the complications around the measurement and maintenance of those goals, we can chat about that in the Q&A later. But let's come now to the second centennial goal. This is the big one, that by 2049, the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China, that China would be restored as one of the advanced nations of the world, strong, modern and wealthy. The Xi administration has made it very clear, year after year, that this goal cannot be achieved without a strong agriculture sector to feed the population. According to the party's 2023 white paper, help if I move some slides while I was talking. According to the 2023 white paper, a strong country must first strengthen its agriculture, and only a prosperous agriculture can make the country strong. By the way, for China policy nerds in the room, the first white paper of the year every year, by tradition, is the paper on rural affairs. So while China is a leader in several industries, the agriculture sector is arguably decades behind the most advanced agricultural nations, including our own. Agricultural agricultural modernisation and food security have become major priorities for China's policymakers. Diseases such as African swine fever, which in 2018 led to the slaughter of 60% of all pigs in China, and skyrocketing pork prices, climate shocks, food shortages during COVID that triggered protests, have all underscored the importance of food security for China's policymakers. Geopolitical tensions, including war in Ukraine, have also raised concerns about China's ability to feed itself. China has 20% of the world's population, but less than 10% of the world's arable land, and only 6% of the world's water resources. Over the past 25 years, China has become increasingly reliant on food imports, arguably during the same period that many other parts of the world have become increasingly reliant on imports of China's manufactured goods. China currently relies on imports for about 1/3 of its total food needs, up from 7% in the year 2000 on the eve of China's ascension to the WTO. Internationally, China's policymakers have worked to diversify food supply chains. Brazil has supplanted the US as the main supplier of soy, but US and Brazil, just those two countries, still account for 90% of China's total soy imports, soy being important for oils, human consumption, but also a primary source of pig feed. China has signed over 100 agricultural cooperation agreements with BRI countries, and Chinese SOEs have purchased millions of hectares of farmland across Asia and Africa. Domestically, the party has launched the Rural Revitalisation Strategy, which replaces the Targeted Poverty Campaign as the main policy framework for rural China's development. Key elements of the strategy are investments in seed technology, loans and grants for businesses, modern farming techniques, better soil management, etc. The new package of rural policies has been accompanied by a really dramatic change in village governance. And this goes to the heart of my recent research, which is focused on the governance arrangements for the implementation of China's rural revitalisation. A really important development that hasn't received the attention that it deserves. China's nearly 700,000 administrative villages are, according to the Constitution, self-governing mass organisations led by a village committee that's elected every 5 years. more than 500 million Chinese citizens still live in villages, still live in these 700,000 villages. The responsibilities of the village community or the village committee include public security, public health, public services, mediation of civil disputes, maintenance of public order. But importantly, very importantly, the village is the unit that controls and legally owns as the collective, as the village collective, farmland. So it is responsible for its distribution to farmers. Urban land belongs to the state in China. Farmland technically belongs to the village collective. So this is a very important unit of administration which is not part of the state. Or is it? Legally not, but things are heading in a direction which certainly blurs the boundary between the state and village administration. Village leaders have over the years, particularly during the past 15 years, become something of an annoyance to party bosses in Beijing. A key reason for that is that village leaders, elected, popular, democratic, direct elections every 5 years, derive their legitimacy from the village community and have not always been cooperative with state authorities when it comes to policy implementation. This has put them in the crosshairs of the Xi administration, which is an increasingly centralised and top-down operation. During the past several years, the party has moved to centralised control over village affairs to ensure greater compliance with policy dictates. This has involved a number of steps over the past few years, including making village officials subject to administrative sanction under the public service law, even though they are not formally state employees, paying their salaries and conducting performance evaluations which have consequences for salaries and bonuses. But the most important, indeed the most significant change in village governance has been to empower the party organisation in the village to essentially take full control of village affairs. Every one of China's 700,000 villages has a party branch, with some more active than others. And in some parts of the countryside, village party secretaries have been dominant players, dominant decision makers in the village communities. But in the past, their role was more commonly limited to communication, propaganda, disseminating information from the party, and to generally overseeing social stability. With village affairs, most importantly economic affairs, land management, etc., including the oversight of collective enterprises, that was left to the directly elected village leader, who was in most cases a separate person. Over the past few years, however, and this is something that I've been studying very closely, and very interesting development, the Xi administration has radically changed the status quo by enforcing the adoption nationwide of a new policy known as Yijiantao, which is two burdens on one shoulder pole. Under this policy, the village party secretary becomes the village leader. The party secretary is then upwardly accountable to the party organisations in the local state. The idea being that they would be more responsive and more compliant to the state's policy agenda. So the party secretary has been shoehorned into the position of village leader, and this has been carried out in 95% of villages across China, some minority areas being the exception, and if people are interested about that, we can talk about why later. Curiously, because the law demands it, there are still elections for village leaders, for the village committee, held every 5 years, but the party secretary must win that election. This is preordained. And so the way in which this is engineered is rather interesting and amusing. I won't talk about that now, but I'm happy to discuss during Q&A. So the party secretary is formally elected as the village leader, as the only candidate. I've been working on a project seeking to understand the consequences of these changes for rural governance and policy making, what it means for local decision making and local livelihoods now that party agents are squarely in charge of village affairs. I've conducted field research in two very different regions, one wealthier part of the East Coast, where there is light industry alongside agriculture, quite wealthy by rural standards, and one poorer area which is predominantly agricultural in the southwest part of China. In both places I talk with villagers, current and former village leaders, party representatives and township officials, and during trips to China to some of the big cities on the eastern seaboard, I've been cross-checking my findings with China-based scholars working in other provinces, places like Shandong, Henan, Anhui. So let me now provide a snapshot of my key findings, and we can dig deeper into anything people are interested in during the Q&A. Party secretaries. Many of them report being quite shocked about being shoehorned into these new roles with huge responsibilities. They're all now paid salaries, but in wealthier areas in particular, many reported that the compensation and benefits were not commensurate with what was expected of them. Nearly all party secretaries in one township I visited had their own family businesses, which was their primary source of income. Party secretaries, village party secretaries are also expected to work closely with township governments, which is the lowest tier of public administration in China, to meet government targets, quotas, and to pass increasingly strict performance evaluations. Indeed, this has been one of the key mechanisms of the Xi Jinping administration's centralisation agenda. It's been strict quotas, targets, and very detailed performance evaluations. The shared challenge of this task, meeting the state's the high-level demands and the consequences of failure, has underscored the importance of personal relations at the local level and mutual back-scratching between township and village leaders. Now, the importance of personal ties in Chinese politics is nothing new. But what is particularly interesting, I think, is that the new governance agenda of strict performance evaluations, tightened regulations, anti-corruption initiatives were designed, at least in part, to neutralise cosy informal ties because they also serve as channels of corruption. But what I've seen in the field is that personal ties have been reinforced by many of these initiatives because there are such intense pressures on these lower levels to deliver on their mandates, but also to meet expectations from higher levels. Cultivating personal ties is also important because the formal incentives are really insufficient levers for township officials to enforce compliance at the village level. Many people that I spoke with, including party secretaries, former village leaders, seem motivated not so much to do this job as a career because there's no career progression. You are not a state official. You cannot be promoted outside of the village. They see that as a job. The value in that position is the access and connections that job provides that can assist their family businesses. Curiously, villagers reported little concern with the loss of the meaningfulness of their vote for village elections. As one villager remarked, the change is good if you happen to have good relations with the party secretary. But it did leave me wondering whether further down the road these changes, governance changes, could see a rebirth of a party elite within the village, since only party members can now vote for the village leader. And indeed, perhaps this is what the party centre intends. It certainly seems to be the view of the Xi administration that only party functionaries can be trusted to carry out the party's agenda. Zooming out for a moment, we can see that developments in village China fit into a broader pattern of tighter party control. In recent years, we've seen party agencies and committees play a more direct role in policy making, subsuming the functions of government agencies in many domains, also in corporate governance, the private sector, and in civil society organisations. So it's part of a broader trend. In many ways, the party's reassertion of its direct control over village China is in some ways the final frontier, the last frontier of semi-autonomous action, social and economic action that the party was not directly overseeing. So what are some of the possible policy consequences of these changes? It's all quite new, so in many ways it's really a little early to assess the impacts of the new governance arrangements and its consequences for rural development and agricultural modernisation. But there are some clear problems that are emerging and apparent. Mobilising the party worked really well for poverty alleviation. It was a huge success because these types of campaigns with specific tasks and specific targets, hard targets, these are the things that the party has always done best. It has incredible capacity for mobilising around specific tasks. 70 million people were lifted above 4,000 RMB per annum over the course of a decade, less than a decade, which was a modest target. Rural revitalisation, the next step, the ambitious agenda for making China an agricultural powerhouse, is going to be a lot harder than eradicating abject poverty. And the party is trusting in its functionaries to be able to deliver on this really ambitious agenda. And I think it's going to be really tough. There's a lot of skepticism among the people that I spoke with in China, both within township and county government, also scholars, economists, social scientists who are working on these issues, and village leaders themselves. One of the main concerns is that the new centralised approach, the top-down targets and quotas, and the evaluations that are performance evaluations that are wrapped around them, politicise economic programs, and in order to meet those targets, there is a common response or a common phenomenon of falsification, faking it. It's been a common problem in local government in China that seems to be getting worse as a result of this top-down agenda. Feigned compliance with activities, collected a lot of wonderful stories about how villages and townships are collaborating to basically fake it through the unrealistic requirements that are sent down from higher levels. Policy prescriptions in China, and I think this probably has also broader implications for China's economy, are increasingly one size fits all. Rural tourism, for example, has been lauded as a tourism development strategy. Beijing has given this a lot of attention on television, through policy documents, but it's only really possible for a tiny percentage of Chinese villages to launch a development strategy based on tourism. There's only a few villages that are strategically located or have cultural or naturally or historically historical resource endowments. And I've seen hundreds of millions of dollars pumped into village tourism projects for which there has been very low return. The people aren't coming. Local economic conditions also really vary tremendously from peri-urban villages that are within a couple of hours' drive of Shanghai, Suzhou or Hangzhou, to the mountains of Anhui and the high Tibet Plateau. Even with those, within those regions, different altitudes, water, differential market access, they really require more localised strategies than the current policy settings and governance settings are allowing for. And those of us here who have been interested in China over the decades are well aware that China's early economic successes really began in the countryside, and they began by setting the farmers free, letting the farmers make their own decisions about what they produce. The current approach, I think, is too prescriptive, and I think the prescriptive approach is really being reinforced by the party-centric governance arrangements. And this is exacerbated by the fact that politically reliable party functionaries are increasingly being sent down to the villages in order to assist with project and policy implementation. But in many cases, these people might be politically reliable but do not have the skills, know-how in order to get results at the village level. Let me just finish up by zooming out again and asking what this means for Australia. I'm often asked that question in the audience, so let me address it head on as a segue into Q&A, and I'm happy to respond to any of your questions. I think the key takeaway from this is that China's rural revitalisation and agricultural modernisation project will take a long time. This is decades. It's not going to be moving as fast as AI or EVs, nowhere near it. And it will likely go through cycles of policy adjustments. China will likely remain highly dependent on food imports for decades to come. And I think this represents important opportunities for Australian agriculture, even though navigating China's regulations, including the biosecurity law, can be rather challenging. But I think there are also important opportunities for research collaboration and investment in agricultural technologies, environmental repair, and waste management. So there are lots of useful things that we can do together and should be doing together. So let me leave it on that note.